We appreciate his service. I would like to call this markup to order. Today's markup will consider two pieces of bipartisan energy legislation, the Hydro Regulatory Efficiency Act of 2012 and the Resolving Environmental and Grid Reliability Conflicts Act of 2012. As chairman and ranking member, we will be given 3 minutes for our opening statement. And I think the chairman of the full committee and ranking member will be given 3 minutes for their opening statement, and the emeritus will be given 3 minutes, and then all the other members will take 1 minute for their opening statement if they'd like to give one. So at this time, I recognize myself for my opening statement. The Hydropower Regulatory Efficiency Act of 2012 was introduced by Representatives Kathy McMorris Rogers and Diane DeGette in order to eliminate the regulatory red tape that has proven to be one of the primary impediments to greater utilization of hydropower resources in America. Their bill will allow companies to reduce the amount of time and money wasted on navigating unnecessary administrative obstacles and instead focus their efforts on constructing hydropower projects that will provide affordable and reliable electricity and create thousands of jobs. The other bill under consideration today is the Resolving Environmental and Grid Reliability Conflicts Act. This legislation is a result of the bipartisan efforts of our colleague Mr. Olson, Mr. Doyle, and Mr. Green. Their bill resolves a conflict between the Federal Power Act and environmental laws and regulations that, if left unresolved, could have implications may be serious for the reliability of the nation's electric grid system. I do not believe that this legislation gives electric generators a free pass on environmental compliance. It is limited only to emergency situations and has been used sparingly over the past 30 years. Furthermore, the legislation requires the Department of Energy to endeavor to minimize any adverse environmental impacts. The bottom line is, I think it's essential that we amend the Federal Power Act so that generators aren't forced to choose between compliance with an emergency order from the Department of Energy or an environmental regulation or order from the EPA. The bills before us today have broad stakeholder support, and I want to commend my friends and colleagues on both sides of the aisle for their efforts to develop this important legislation, and I hope that everyone will be able to support it. With it, at this time, I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Rush, for 3 minutes for an opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for convening this markup. And Mr. Chairman, as you know, I have repeatedly stated that I have an open mind on energy issues, and while protecting the public health and the environment, they are a part of my core values, and they've always been a hallmark of my voting record. I want to also remind you, Mr. Chairman, and the members of the subcommittee, that I've always repeatedly said that I look for common sense proposals to emerge out of this subcommittee. And I urge the majority to continue to work with our side to tighten up the language in H.R. 4273 in order to ensure that this provision could not be used for broader purposes. And in doing so, I believe that this particular bill can be an example of common sense legislation that was brought about through compromise and through bipartisan collaboration. Mr. Chairman, today we are requiring that our energy companies undergo a transformation to cleaner, more efficient operating facilities through the match standard and other Clean Air Act provisions. And I fully support this transformation. And I have resisted every effort to roll back these provisions or weaken them in any manner. But I believe that we must also have contingencies that are in place that are aimed at preventing blackouts and loss of power to consumers and to companies and other users, especially during the extremely hot and cold months when public health could be endangered. I have in mind a few years back the hundreds of deaths in my own city as it relates to blackouts and disruption in the heating of these different facilities and homes. In hearing after hearing, I have argued that complying with match standards and other EPA regulations will not cause significant energy shortages because the experts from DOE and FERC have assured us that this is the case. So I believe, Mr. Chairman, that in order to ensure that we are able to effectively protect our constituents from potential power shortages, we must strengthen the language in Section 202C so that DOE has the tools necessary to address this issue, and that we're not burdening utilities with two competing and opposing mandates. I believe that it's possible for us to continue to work in a bipartisan way and produce common sense, effective legislation that addresses this issue without allowing for broad and ambiguous language that companies can use as a way to skirt other non-germane environmental regulations. So I want to continue to work with you, Mr. Chairman, and work with all my colleagues on this issue and on these concerns, so that these concerns and issues are addressed and we're able to come up with a legislative fix for a problem that I know deserves all of our attention. I thank you. You're back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. At this time, we recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton, for a 3-minute opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have an opening statement, but I appreciate the offer.
Okay. And recognize that. Oh, sorry. Do you have an opening statement, Jay? Recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, for a 1-minute opening statement.
I just appreciate the work on these two bills. The hydropower is a great piece of legislation. I commend my colleague from Washington State. And the basic premise that when two federal agencies fight over who can power our country, and having electricity supplied is life critical, we shouldn't let one trump the other, and that's the importance of this second piece of legislation. Look forward to moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you. At this time, I recognize the gentleman, Mr. Green from Texas, who's one of the co-sponsors of Resolving Environmental Grid Reliability Conflict Act.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding the markup today, and I know the staff on both sides of our aisle are diligently working to come to an agreement on H.R. 4273, the Resolving Environmental and Grid Reliability Conflicts Act 2012. I'm hopeful we can come to a positive resolution on this. This is not a messaging bill. It's not an anti-EPA bill. It's not an anti-MATS bill. Instead, it's a bill that will address a very worrisome deficiency in current law that is only going to become more prominent in the coming years. We all agree that our grid is facing challenges it's never faced before due to continuing population growth in certain parts of our country, cyber security threats, and cheap natural gas prices leading to the retirement of some coal-fired plants. Generators need to be able to comply with the DOE emergency order without risking costly litigation and excessive fines. However, I agree that we also need to ensure that these generators are operating with environmental safeguards. So again, I thank the majority and minority staff for agreeing to work this out. It's too important an issue for us not to, and I hope neither side will let politics get in the way of our final agreement. And I yield back my time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this time, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Terry, for an opening statement. Okay. This time the chairman will recognize the gentlelady, Ms. McMorris Rogers, who's one of the co-sponsors of our hydropower bill, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you convening this markup. Mr. Chairman, as we continue to advance in all of the above energy strategy, we must remember to include our nation's largest, cleanest, most affordable renewable energy source, hydropower. That's why I'm proud to be sponsoring H.R. 5892, the Hydropower Regulatory Efficiency Act of 2012, with several of my colleagues on this committee, including Mrs. Daggett, Mr. Terry, Mr. Markey, Mr. Latta, Mr. Matheson, and former Chairman Dingell. This bipartisan coalition does not often agree on energy policy, but what we do agree upon is that the regulatory process for hydropower, especially those smaller projects, is too convoluted, too costly, and too cumbersome. Furthermore, we agree that there is tremendous untapped potential in our nation's hydropower sector. This legislation streamlines the hydropower permitting process for small hydropower and conduit projects, reducing the burdens impeding development and getting this low-cost power to communities faster. Unleashing American ingenuity to increase hydropower production will lower energy costs and help create thousands of jobs. Mr. Chairman, I urge all of my colleagues to support American energy and support H.R. 5892. And I yield back.
Thank you very much, and we appreciate your leadership on this issue. This time I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Doyle, who's one of the co-sponsors of H.R. 4273, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, since the hearing on H.R. 4273, work has continued on this bill with input from both sides. I'm pleased that we've had agreement on so many issues, and the bill continues to get better and better, and I want to thank the chair and the ranking member for their efforts. I want to assure my colleagues on this side of the aisle, this bill does not rewrite the Clean Air Act or overhaul the Clean Water Act or the Endangered Species Act. All we're trying to do here is fix a clear conflict in federal law with a narrow, targeted approach. Reliability concerns are real, and pretending like they aren't isn't responsible. Just last week, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation issued their summer reliability assessment. They told us that reserves in Texas are coming up short to meet peak demand this summer, and that the California reserve margin will be extremely tight. Now, I know we don't agree on much in this Congress, but a narrow bill that addresses reliability concerns and environmental concerns should be something that both sides of the aisle can be proud of. I look forward to continuing to work with the chairman and our ranking member on this bill. It's my hope we can put aside politics for a while and make good policy. This is a chance to do just that, Mr. Chairman. I thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Doyle. At this time, I recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Upton, for 3 minutes for an opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have before us two very important pieces of bipartisan energy legislation, and I want to commend my colleagues on both sides of the aisle for their hard work. Resolving Environmental and Grid Reliability Conflicts Act of 2012, authored by Mr. Olson, Doyle, and Green, protects our nation's electricity producers from being penalized or sued for violating a conflicting environmental law when they have been directed by the federal government to operate during an emergency. The bill addresses the basic principle that the federal government should not be able to direct a generator to operate for emergency purposes and then turn around and fining them for doing so. Potential conflicts both the electric grid. It puts the electric grid at risk and puts generators in the inequitable and unenviable position of having to choose between keeping the lights on and meeting their environmental obligations. It's not fair. It needs to be resolved, and I'm pleased that our colleagues have developed a bipartisan legislation to do just that. I also understand that there is a commitment from both sides to continue working to address some remaining concerns with H.R. 4273, and I'm encouraged by those good faith discussions, and I'm hopeful that the issues can be resolved. The other bill considered today is the Hydropower Regulatory Efficiency Act of 2012. Again, I'm pleased that our colleagues, Ms. McMorris Rogers and Ms. Daggett, have worked together to develop this critical piece of hydropower legislation. Hydropower is the nation's largest renewable energy resource, and the bill before us today will help facilitate the development of new hydropower resources that will provide affordable and reliable energy for decades to come. Legislation has great promise for increased hydropower development across the nation, including my state of Michigan. Meeting the new hydropower project demand facilitated by the bill will create thousands of construction and manufacturing jobs to help stimulate the economy. Further, the electricity produced by these new projects will help provide clean and low-cost power to American homes and businesses. So I want to emphasize how pleased I am to see both sides working together. Two more examples of bipartisan energy legislation, and I promise to move them quickly through the full committee, assuming that we approve both here this morning. I yield back.
Thank you. And I also, Mr. Doyle, just wanted to say that we do look forward to working with you. I think we've made great progress, and hopefully we can continue to do so. This time I'd like to recognize the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Castor, for the purpose of an opening statement.
I'll waive my opportunity for a statement. Thank you.
This time I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Olson, for the purpose of an opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for bringing H.R. 4273, the Resolving Environmental and Grid Reliability Conflicts Act of 2012, before the subcommittee for markup. This bill has bipartisan support. I'd like to especially thank Mr. Doyle of Pennsylvania and Mr. Green of Texas for working with me to produce a bill that has a good chance of being signed into law in this Congress. I introduced this bill to clarify Congress's intent that compliance with emergency order issued by the Department of Energy should not be a punishable violation of any federal, state, or local environmental laws or regulations. Section 202C of the Federal Power Act cannot work effectively unless Congress passes legislation to resolve the potential conflict between laws. Emergency orders are just that, emergency orders. They are not issued lightly. The intent of this bill is not to avoid environmental compliance. This bill is about keeping the grid operational during a crisis. We are committed to find a solution that provides energy consumers, the environment, and those who provide power with some certainty. I'm confident this bill achieves that goal. I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to move it forward. I yield back.
Thank you. At this time, I recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Dingell, for the purposes of a 3-minute opening statement.
You are most courteous, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you. And I commend you for holding this markup. First, I want to commend my colleagues on the committee, Ms. McMorris-Rogers and Ms. DeGette. They've worked together in a truly bipartisan matter to bring forward the Hydropower Regulatory Efficiency Act. This legislation goes about accomplishing its goals in a common-sense manner, and I'm happy to be a co-sponsor. I also want to thank my colleagues who have been working hard to find a compromise agreement for the Resolving Environmental and Grid Reliability Conflicts Acts. Specifically, there are many, but Mr. Green, Mr. Doyle, Mr. Waxman, as well as our chairman, Mr. Upton and Mr. Olson. They and their staffs have shown exceptional knowledge in the issue and willingness to explore all options. And I want to commend them for the classy way in which they have done this. I hope we can continue to work together to find a way to address this complex issue. As I said in last month's hearing, it is quite unacceptable to put utilities in a position of being fined by one federal agency for complying with the order of another agency. However, I remain concerned about the unintended consequences that a blanket waiver from liability for all environmental laws may have. We do not know what the entire list of environmental laws that may be affected by an emergency order. Agencies that have jurisdiction over these laws may include not only EPA, but also the Departments of Interior, Commerce, Agriculture, and Defense, as well as a number of state agencies. We must find a way to prevent, to the greatest extent possible, violation of these regulations and when they are necessary, to waive utilities from liability. This is a difficult issue to address, but the way the committee has performed in its dealings with it so far makes me hopeful that we can have a satisfactory agreement before the full committee markup. And I know that your leadership, Mr. Chairman, will lead us in that direction, for which I thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. At this time, I recognize the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. McKinley, for an opening statement. The gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulate our colleague from Washington for the work that she has been pursuing on hydropower, and my colleague from Colorado, Ms. DeGette, for the work that she's been doing as well. You know, this is an important issue to the West, and I look at hydropower as a two-for-one, water storage and the ability to generate clean energy. And I hope that the states who have renewable portfolio standards like Colorado will look at this opportunity to see how they can actually open up their renewable portfolio standards to include more hydropower development. I yield back my time.
Thank you. Gentleman from Louisiana, seek recognition for an opening statement.
I do, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having this markup and for bringing these bills forward, and I'd also like to thank my colleagues for offering up this legislation. First, I'd like to offer my support for the Hydropower Regulatory Efficiency Act. I know our committee and House Republicans are committed to pursuing an all-of-the-above energy strategy for our country, and one of the biggest impediments to utilizing more hydropower is regulatory red tape. This bill addresses those impediments, and I thank my colleague, Ms. McMorris-Rogers, for bringing this bill. Also, the security of this nation depends on a reliable power grid, and Mr. Olson's legislation provides tools to ensure that third-party lawsuits don't jeopardize the reliability of our grid in an emergency. People that produce power for our country are unfortunately posed with a dilemma in the event of an emergency. We had some of this brought forward at our hearing on this bill, but there's a recognition that if a company is placed in this situation, you want them to be able to act in the best interest of the consumers and not have a fear that doing the right thing is going to open them up to a host of environmental lawsuits. So I think if you look at the bills we're bringing forward in our subcommittee, they address energy problems in our country, help us to create more jobs with a more reliable energy security here, and appreciate the members for bringing it forward. Look forward to passing these out of committee, and I yield back.
Thank you. Does the gentleman from California seek recognition for opening statement? Well, I believe that concludes the opening statements. What did you say? Oh, no, he doesn't want to do one. So at this time, the chair would call up H.R. 5892 and ask the clerk to report.
H.R. 5892, to improve hydropower and for other purposes.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill will be dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any point, so ordered. Are there any bipartisan amendments? Seeing none, are there any other amendments? We're moving right along here. The question would now then occur on favorably reporting H.R. 5892. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill is favorably reported. The chair would now call up H.R. 4273 and ask the clerk to report.
H.R. 4273, to clarify that compliance with an emergency order under Section 202 of the Federal Power Act may not be considered a violation of any federal, state, or local environmental law or regulation, and for other purposes.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill will be dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any point. So ordered. Are there any bipartisan amendments to be offered? Are there any amendments to be offered? Boy, this is my kind of markup. I like this. The chairman, gentleman from Illinois.
Chairman, I just want to commend you on your speediness.
Thank you.
Yeah, you are showing remarkable speed here.
I really appreciate those kind words, and we've had so many nice markups like this year. So the question would now occur on favorably reporting H.R. 4273. All of those in favor shall signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill is favorably reported. Without objection, the staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes to H.R. 4273 and H.R. 5892 as so ordered. I would like to thank the members and the staff, and we look forward to working with all parties as we move forward to the full committee to make sure that all the concerns are met. And without objection, the subcommittee will stand adjourned.